I already put that disclaimer in there that the only thing that's for certain is that nothing is for certain.
Welcome to The Rich Outdoors, where we break down the tips, tactics, and strategies of hunting's greats to not only help you become better hunters, but to motivate and inspire you between hunting adventures. For more about us, including additional resources on our guests and links to everything we cover in the interview, check out therichoutdoors.net. Welcome to another episode of the Rich Outdoors podcast. Today, back by popular demand for his charming good looks and maybe something to do about his elk hunting knowledge, is Jason Phelps of Phelps Game Calls. Jason, like I said, is from Phelps Game Calls or owns Phelps Game Calls. He makes awesome calls and is very knowledgeable about calling elk. If you guys haven't picked up your game calls yet this year, head on over to his site, and not only will he help you kind of get squared away with what calls you need, he's great at picking out what calls will work best for you, and he's super helpful. Jason was actually on back in episode 4 where we talked kind of about game calls, calling elk behavior, and more about his background. So if you haven't got to listen to that episode, you could hit that one first. It's not necessary. We just had a lot of requests to do another episode. So Jason and I put together basically a top 10 list of mistakes that we have both made numerous times over the years and kind of the learning curve that we went through. So hopefully this is a great resource for you guys and everyone to kind of pick up all the mistakes, and I'm sure we've all made them, and maybe we can just reinforce them before hunting season so we remember not to make those mistakes. If you like the episode, be sure to let us know. If there's some questions we didn't quite get to or didn't cover and there's more to something that you want to hear about, also let us know. There's a comment section on the blog under the podcast website, or leave us a message or something on Facebook or Instagram or any of the social medias, and we would be happy to help answer those questions or cover another topic that maybe we did not cover well enough. So, enjoy the show, guys. Hey, Jason, welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
You getting excited about elk hunting yet?
Oh, yeah, the pre-rut is definitely on. No, what are we, 11 weeks out?
Yeah, just about. Well, when's Washington start?
September 12th.
Oh, wow. That's late.
Yeah, 12th to the 24th this year. Usually we, got like a 2nd to the 13th season. So this is, a lot better season dates than we've had in the past.
So are you going to start out hunting in Washington, or you got other plans?
I actually put in for Eastern Washington draw tag, and I'm not going to go hunt spikes over there, so I'll just go to Idaho for over the counter and probably won't hunt Washington this year.
Oh, okay. So yeah, Idaho starts September 1st?
Yep.
Nice. Yep, I'm getting excited. I do have a mule deer tag before elk season, so I'm really trying to stay a little bit focused on mule deer, but that's kind of hard. It's kind of hard. I'm excited about elk season.
Yeah, you do a Nevada deer tag, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a hot one. It's starts August 10th, so head down there, cook a little, climb some really tall mountains, and hopefully get a mule deer.
Perfect.
So, Jason, a little bit different episode. We had you on before, I think episode 4. For anyone who hasn't heard Jason's backstory, jump on that podcast first, and you'll hear all about him and, it's tips and tactics for calling elk. And on this episode, we had a lot of requests to kind of do more of just hearing from you on as far as elk and maybe what people are doing wrong or how they can improve and all the little things that go into elk hunting and elk calling. So we're going to jump in and kind of talk about, the 10 mistakes that guys are making and the 10 things that they can do and fix to become better elk hunters or maybe just notch more tags.
Yeah. So, many hunters would consider listening to all these failures is kind of a bore, but I look at it as as being pretty fortunate. I get the opportunity to listen to all of these mistakes that these other hunters are making. And just as much as I know of what works and doesn't work, I'm able to build kind of that box of tools, put it in my toolbox for when I'm out. These by listening to other hunters, I'm basically exposed to way more scenarios than I am on my own. So I look at every detail that kind of leads to these missed opportunities and failures, and try to flip those around and build successes on it. So I'm pretty fortunate to listen to all of these, blown setups or missed shots and stuff like that.
Yeah, just follow me around for a while. You have plenty of mistakes to learn from.
Oh, trust me. I say I fail 9 times out of 10. It's just I get lucky that one time. So
yeah, if you want to be successful, you just got to screw up a whole bunch, and try not to screw up the same thing twice, because there's enough things to screw up that you can just do it once and fail a lot.
Yeah, and I mean the stats show it. I mean, you look at some of these units across the West, and you're seeing 6-7% success rates, and the stat that everybody throws out there that 10% of guys are killing all the elk, and the other 90% seem to have this thirst for knowledge. And while there's a ton of material out there, I think getting to the end of the season, one thing I always do, even with my successes, is try to reevaluate. Where was I lacking? Whether it was physical, for me, it's usually physical conditioning, but was my calling bad? Was my equipment bad? Was my gear bad? And try to reevaluate that. And so I think this topic is kind of good by, somebody looking back and saying, well, did I do this right? Did I do that right? And then these are, kind of the 10 most common mistakes. It's hard to put a list together, but these ones are talked about quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things. If you can grow from not only your mistakes but other people's mistakes, it'll help you grow that much faster. So, yeah, it's a great topic. I'm excited. So,
yeah,
our first one, and then these aren't in order per se, and we kind of talked about this, and these are kind of just 10 overall mistakes that are pretty common within elk hunting. But the first one is calling your way into elk or not getting close enough before you make that call.
Yeah, a lot of times in my seminars, I get asked, what's the biggest mistake in elk hunting, archery elk hunting, and calling elk in? And I would say this is probably, we just said we weren't going to number them, but as far as the calling elk in part, or the chase, as we call it, when we hear a bugle, it gets your blood pumping, you're excited. You're all jacked up, and usually what happens is you evaluate the wind, kind of evaluate the herd, what you think they're doing, and we walk 50 feet towards him and we bugle again. And he may respond at that point, in the same spot. And so that worked, and I don't blame anybody, because listening to a bull bugle is awesome. But what happens is they walk another 50 feet and they bugle again. They may maybe they're 400 or 500 yards out. They may get one more response, and the bull may not have budged. But you do it again and get 50 or 100 feet closer, and you bugle, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, that bull just keeps paralleling me, or staying the same distance ahead, or sometimes moving ahead of me. And what you did is basically, these elk don't necessarily want to fight to have to give up their cows. And if you're giving them this much advance notice that, hey, I'm coming to you, so far you've advertised yourself probably as a bull. Your locator bugling at them. Maybe some guys don't know the difference, or challenge bugling at them. You're basically advertising from 500 yards away. I'm coming in. I'm looking for a fight, and you're basically giving him all the chance in the world to get out of there. And so that's. I would say you can also flip that strategy though and be very successful with it if you're hunting in tandem or with a partner.
Do you ever, and just you kind of made me think of this, but do you ever put someone back and keep them locating while you move in? Because a lot of times you start moving on an elk, and either you drop into where you can't really tell where he was, or he just completely shuts up. And so you're always playing that guessing game on how close you are. Do you ever leave someone farther back just to keep him talking?
For sure. That's what I was just mentioning, as far as using this to your advantage. If that guy stays, that bull, basically is a locator bugle. It's non-threatening. You're far enough away, he's not going to budge. Now you can use a hunter that's going to go in completely silent, and basically leave the caller, keeping him vocal, and use that hunter slip in. And we have used that and been successful with it. But as far as the hunter / caller moving in tandem or together and getting close, I think you get into that chase where it's like you could go a mile or two and basically stay the same distance, or you're never gaining any ground on that bull. And if that happens, a lot of times I'll just be completely quiet on the bugle and then basically try to make up ground without making a noise in the direction I think he's going. But trying to pre-advertise and say, hey, I'm looking for a fight and I'm coming after you, more times than not is going to leave the bull, getting away.
No, yeah, I think that's a big mistake that a lot of guys make is you get nervous and you kind of want to check to see where he is, and whether it's
Yep.
A big bull or you just kind of see some elk, you kind of always want to know where they're at, and you're playing that game where you can't hear what he's doing or you can't hear him. You start second guessing everything.
Yep. And I always say make your best guess, within 100 or 200 yards of where you think he is. And if you don't call, you have a better chance of him not moving, if you just let them continue what they're doing. And then usually when you get down in there, where these elk are, it's pretty elky, and you can start to read the tracks, and then you can kind of go off of that rather than the audible locator. Once I'm down in there where these elk are, usually you've got some indication of tracks or which direction they're going, and try to play off of that.
So how do we know when to stop? I know a lot of times I moved in and just bumped cows, or even a satellite bull that was kind of hanging outside of the area, and I don't know how many times I've been busted that way, and it kind of just blows all the elk up. How do you know when to stop and start calling again?
It's just kind of by feel. A lot of times we have spotted a cow or a bull before we get in, or we get too tight and all of a sudden it's like everybody freezes, or whoever's hunting freezes, and we're like, well, there they are, and then that's when we're close enough. Yeah. And the other time, you're trying to use all your senses. You're trying to use sound. If you can, a lot of times we'll hear a stick crack, and you're getting closer before you can see them. If the wind's blowing the right direction, or if they've been in that area, you really start to pick up the smell. So you're trying to use all of your senses to come up with a game plan. If I need to, I may get in close, and if I'm really second guessing myself, I'll use maybe a cow call, because the way nature works is that cow is going to go to that bull advertising himself most of the time, anyways. So I'm going to try to play off of that and maybe use a cow call without advertising that I'm a bull and I'm this close.
Yeah, and then it's less threatening, and he's not going to try to move.
Yeah, and you may not get a response from a cow. It may have been that locator bugle that elicited this response, and so you're trying to just use your eyes, ears, and nose, and come up with the best guess, along with if you can tell which direction they were going, or if you have an idea where they're bedding, or they're if they're going to feed, or what they're doing, you got an idea on which general direction they're moving. So give yourself some I guess. A buffer in either direction, that you can move through.
So just overall, would you say you are more risky, or I guess more risk adverse in trying to get as close as you can, or do you usually just give yourself a little bit of a buffer?
No, I'm extremely aggressive, and we usually bump. We bump a lot of elk, and so if I know it's a big bull or a big bull that's been pretty patternable, I may be a little more reserved. Mm-hmm. But if I'm going in blind and don't really know what I'm after, I'm pretty aggressive. We bump cows, and a lot of times bumping cows, you can use that out of box strategies and rip off a challenge bugle, and we've called bulls in that way. Even if we do bump a cow, it doesn't mean all's lost.
Yeah, and to the same effect that if you bump a satellite bull and there's a satellite bull that you kind of just figure is hanging outside of that herd, not necessarily a bad thing,
Yeah,
and not even to the point where you should start calling right there, like. Those satellite bulls, they're running around teasing each other. Like, it's not that big of a deal. You might get that lead cow on high alert, but don't always assume that the whole thing's busted if you bust a satellite.
Yeah, or if you have a wind right, maybe just sit for 5 minutes, let things settle down, and then kind of restart. They may start chirping or whatever, and let things settle down, and don't lose all the effort, whatever effort it did take to get there. It's not all lost.
Yeah, I know a lot of guys will kind of get into panic mode if they bump something. Like, it's over. I got a challenge bugle right from here. Yeah,
the old school rifle elk hunter in me usually wants to run after him, and I have to usually talk myself into just holding on and letting things settle down. I have to remember I have a bow in my hand.
You can't just chase him into the next clear cut, huh?
No.
All right, so number 2 is reluctancy to change strategy.
All right, yeah. So reluctancy to change strategy. A lot of guys go into a hunt with a game plan. I'm gonna camp here. I'm gonna park here. I'm gonna walk to this point. I'm gonna glass elk up, or I'm gonna locate a bull from here. And if not, then plan B is to walk along this ridge and locate every 200 or 300 yards, whatever it may be. You know, if there are an elk there and you've did it for a day or two, and you're sure that there's either there's not elk answering you or responding to you or at that elevation, or there's just not any elk in the area, you need to recognize that as a hunter that wants to notch a tag and make a change. I'm going to use a Bob Marshall trip, for example, in 2012, a super dry season. I went in there with my buddy, and he had let me know end of July that basically all the alpine feed for the elk had burnt up. And they were already seeing different patterns in the elk and the deer and their feeding patterns, and they weren't in their normal locations. So when we got there, the typical way to hunt is sit in the alpine in the morning and at night and try to catch them, out feeding. Play on the calling a little bit. We're in there at the end of September. And we had to completely change. We started in the alpine, and not a lot of sign because there's no food. There's no reason for them to be there. So we dropped down to basically the benches, looking at the wallows, looking at some of these, upper areas that still held water. And we'd see a little bit of tracks, and there was nothing. And then we're like, well, we don't typically hunt down in these, deep drainages in the Bob during September. But that was our next step, like progressively. We know there are elk in there. We have to find them. And basically what had happened is that the only thing that was green in the whole place was right down along the creek bottoms. That's where their food was, their water was, and essentially they were bedding down there. So by us being 2,000, 2,500 feet up on the ridge, we weren't even hearing some of these elk doing their thing in the morning at night. So by recognizing, that they've hunted in that country a certain way for 10 or 20 years, by getting, essentially a food change, we had to completely change strategies. Also, it kind of goes along with just finding the elk, even if it isn't a food source. Pressure. You can scout all summer and not have anybody around. Well, the elk are going to be in a completely different pattern than you are when you show up. And that's one of the things that I pride myself in, is if there are elk in the country, by cutting the country up, I should be able to find them within 5 or 6 hours. Whether it's dropping all the way down into the drainage, up and down the slope, and then also running, parallel down the contours, up and down the canyons, and trying to pick up sign, whether it's, scent, tracks, rubs, audible, but don't get stuck in kind of, that ridgetop bugling mode, or don't get stuck in still hunting, halfway up the slope if there aren't any elk there. And we touched on a little bit, the ability or the recognition of just getting out of an area. We've seen it before where we've hunted areas that have held good bulls or good number of bulls, good number of elk, and go back in, and it's just they seem to be non-existent for whatever reason. It's kind of unexplainable. But being able to know when to pull the plug. We touched on it. Washington has a 12-day season. When you're in Washington, everything is super critical. You've only got 12 days. If you waste 2 or 3 days in the area, you've cut your season, by a quarter, or up to a half if you try to hold out for 4 or 5 days hunting a certain area.
And I think you see a lot of that with, when you've been in an area or you've hunted in an area. And I know, like in Idaho, there's places, I used to hunt and they used to hold elk, and now they just don't due to pressure and wolves and things like that. But I don't know how many times it's going to take me to keep going back in there, just, knowing that there used to be elk there. But sometimes you got to change that strategy and even change locations for that matter.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, a lot of these guys these big elk camps, they'll put in, a big wall tent or a base camp, and they essentially feel tied to it. And that's why we stay pretty mobile. We hunt out of our trucks a lot, not necessarily road hunting, but we're using our trucks to get us 10 or 15 miles to a different basin and, leave 2 hours before dark and really, have a good idea if there's elk in the area. And then, we've basically turned, not giving gear plugs here, but we've turned our kits into, as ultra lightweight mobile base camps as we can, so we can still spike out, kind of have the luxury of a base camp back there, and then be a lot more mobile as far as, if you find elk, we're able to stay for days on end. If we don't find elk, we're back to the truck, pulling up maps, checking areas B, C, D, and E until we can get into elk.
And sometimes you just got to cover an entire mountain. I know there's been days where, end up 50, 60 miles from where camp is, and, just cruising in the pickup and trying to just cover ground. And because sometimes, you gotta switch it up if you're not finding out.
Yeah. And I mean, guys being down in timber, a lot of times, having this kind of touch on elk hunting knowledge a little bit, which is the next topic, but, we'll sacrifice a night, maybe go get on the highest vantage point we can and get out our spotters or our binoculars and scan every piece of ground we can, so we at least have a fresh start for the morning. Like at night, we'd like to be down in the trenches, trying to call these bulls in right as soon as they're coming out of timber to feed or into the meadows. But, sometimes we make the decision that, hey, this just isn't working. We need to sacrifice a night when these things are going to be coming out to feed, and basically just let our glass, use our glass to get into the next opportunity.
Yeah, and like you said, that's kind of number 3 is one of the big mistakes is not having the knowledge of elk and understanding, what those elk are doing or where there could be or what that drainage looks like and kind of where might hold the elk and where might not be elk.
Yep. Yeah, just elk hunting knowledge. I've been really fortunate. My family is completely grown up in the woods. They've basically all logged. We're in the woods cutting firewood. We're in the woods, picking mushrooms, picking cones. So I've got, picked up on little bits here and there, and just, from the rifle hunting days to the muzzleloader hunting days to now, 15 years of bow hunting. You kind of get that sense on, well, if you look at a ridge, you're looking at nooks and crannies. Like, if it's just one solid slope, there's nothing really that breaks that ground, kind of getting into where elk are hanging. Do they have their water? Do they have their bedding? Do they have their food? So I have a pretty good idea if I look at a ridge line where I think elk are going to be at on that ridge. So that comes along, like moon phase. I know I always hunt the dates regardless, because the rut is based on photo period, the daylight throughout the day, but the activity is definitely going to change. If you've got a full moon and these elk are able to do all their eating, all of their breeding, and you're going to have a really short window on both ends of daylight to get it done.
Especially if during that moon phase you have those high temperatures and things like that. So that comes into consideration as well.
Yeah. I mean, elk a lot of times will get really lethargic, or even, I kind of explain it as rut sick. That bull is doing a ton of work, a ton of bugling. He's all amped up. And a lot of times they use that midday heat. They're just going to bed down and sit still. There will still be some activity. He's going to check on his cows and do his thing. But, they do get lethargic, and you got a real short window. So we may make the decision, well, we know they've been feeding in this general area. Rather than go look at them, we're only going to have an hour before they transition back to bed. We may get up 2 hours before daylight and try to get under them so that we have the thermals right for to hunt that specific group of elk. Yeah. So it's having the knowledge base on what to do in certain situations. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, if someone doesn't have the knowledge or maybe wants to get more knowledge, what's the best way for someone who's, hasn't been hunting for the last 20 years or even 10 years or 5 years, whatever it may be, how does one go about gaining that knowledge? I mean, is there good books you recommend or videos or what's your recommendation?
Man, I kind of learned on my own. When I started, there wasn't a whole lot, and it's almost like the getting in shape thing. There are no shortcuts really. I mean, they're listening to these podcasts, listening to good elk hunters, guys that consistently get it done, and being willing to change is probably your best. I haven't read a lot of books. I'm not going to lie. I do read articles, how-to articles, and always try to pick up. But really, as we touched on earlier, I learn a lot more from real-world experience. So I can ask the questions like, well, is that bull fired up? Did he have satellite bulls? What were his cows doing? I'm able to get real-world and kind of ask my questions to the guy telling the story. But it really is, the best way to do it is go out with a guy that's successful. If you can find a guy willing to let you tag along, invite you on a hunt, without sounding too needy. I mean, that's ultimately going to cut your learning curve, in half or exponentially.
That, and I mean, finding someone that you can hunt with or have a mentor is huge. Yep. I think if you get the opportunity, I was given an opportunity a long time ago to kind of go along and pack for someone who is an excellent elk hunter, and jump at the chance, and that meant I didn't get a hunt, but at the same time, that knowledge that I learned in that week of hunting with someone who
Yep.
knows what they're doing is invaluable.
Yeah. And, when I was in the Bob, I went with my good buddy, John Davis, who is an amazing elk hunter, well established, pretty decorated as far as trophies go. And it was awesome. I'm not going to lie. I'm a pretty confident elk hunter and, on the edge of being overconfident, but it was amazing. It was amazing hunting with John, another good elk hunter that we have never hunted together, and kind of seeing where we were similar and also where he did stuff different, so like you said, being able to tag along with a guy that's very successful, kind of, added to my arsenal.
One thing I was going to touch on, as well as elk knowledge, and I see this a lot, is that people get fixated on areas that look elky, and an area can look very elky but not hold elk. And sometimes we get fixated on this, this is just a beautiful area, but if there's not, the only thing that looks elky is elk sign.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, during the rut, you're looking for rubs, you're looking for wallows, you're looking for tracks, and auto, you're listening for bugles. I kind of got trapped. We have a wilderness here in Washington in 08 and 09, and I spent 20 days of my elk season in there. And finally, on the second year, it's amazing country. We saw some giant bulls in there, but it's just they weren't there. And, I made the decision to pull out. But, yeah, it's beautiful country, beautiful elk country. It just you start to get that sense like I'm just not going to get it done in here.
Yeah, I've been there.
And I've just got to pull the plug, and came back home, and within 2 days was fortunate to kill a small Roosevelt bull. But last thing on elk hunting knowledge I want to touch on is just knowing their routines. Elk have to have food, water, and bedding. Those are the three things they need to survive. It's their circle of life. Also kind of thrown in the rut, they've got those three things that are necessities, but you also kind of feed on the fight and love side of that bull. So know what they're doing, know an area, be able to identify a bedding area, whether it's a bench across the drainage, identify a water source, and then some sort of a food, whether it's south slope, eat whatever slope it is, but they have to have some sort of feed.
And on that, I would say that a lot of guys get wrapped up in things like water and looking for water holes. You'll find a lot of elk can water in the smallest little creeks that you wouldn't think of. And there's actually far more water out there. So guys will hit these water holes, like a cattle water hole, and a lot of elk just aren't going to hit that, and especially in the daylight.
Yeah, I mean, especially for us guys up north, Arizona and New Mexico, they're kind of, that's a completely different story, I think, but for us guys up north, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, we have a lot of water. Mm-hmm. And I think, we don't necessarily, I particularly don't play water, I don't strategize that too much into my hunt as long as it's available and in the area.
Yeah. All righty, so number 4, we're getting into resistance to do what it takes. And I know this is a big thing. A lot of guys, you get tired, you get burnt out at the end of the season, and you just don't want to go that extra mile.
Yeah, we've kind of went to the strategy that we never really pass up a bugling opportunity. And I caveat that, and I'll kind of explain it later. But if we have a bull bugling down below us, I don't care if it's, a giant drainage, if it's, 1,500 feet up above us. If there's an opportunity and the wind's not completely screwed up and a bunch of, certain things aren't messed up, and I think we have a legitimate chance of seeing what that bull is and getting him to bow range, we very rarely ever pass it up. And hunting with different people outside of our core group, it's more of a mental game too at that point, because you start talking yourself into, well, what if we, went this way, or what if we went that way, or that's going to burn half the day at one chance, and it's going to be pretty physically exhausting. Am I going to be able to go after that? Mm-hmm. And we've just, like my bull last year, located it from the road in Idaho, right from the truck, and the reason he was down there is because he probably felt safe, even though he was, within earshot of the road. And me and Charlie looked at it, we never second guessed it. We're like, well, the first thing we both asked each other is where we're going to park the truck. And with that, we were already thinking, like, there was no question, we're both going. Once we found out what time it was, about how long we thought it was going to take to get down into the bottom, we were gone. On day 3 or 4, you may be tired, you may be sore, and you've got a bull bugling way up a basin, and you start to look at your GPS, and I'm 4.5 miles or 5 miles from the truck. Doubt doubt and, not necessarily mental toughness, but you just start questioning, is this worth it? Is this the best decision? And I don't know if we're just screwed up in the head or what's going on, but we've kind of quit asking those questions as of late,
No,
and it's paid off.
no, I think when I think of that question and the resistance to do what it takes, it's like that 9:30 or 10 o'clock. You could go back to camp and take a nap, or almost even 11 o'clock, or you could just keep plugging away and keep plugging away. And I think, like you said, it's that mental toughness and that discipline just to go that extra mile, because you never know what's over that next ridge or that next timber patch. And it's easy to hunt when you're in elk all the time, and it's easy to hunt when they're bugling all the time, and it's early and the things are going perfect. But successful people are the ones that can get it done when everything isn't going perfect as planned, and they take that extra mile or go into that next hole, even if nothing's bugling in there, and kind of go just, hey, let's go see what's here.
Yeah, I mean, I have the internal battles all day long, and I'm tired on day 3 or 4. Should I take a nap, or do I need to go find some elk? And we talk about it. Unless you're for sure that you're resting or taking a nap somewhere that's going to be productive that night, we're constantly doing something that's going to produce a result, a positive result, whether that's finding new elk, if it's the middle of the day and we're just struggling finding elk. It's in my best interest to be walking, trying to find a water hole, pick up on new sign, explore a new area, and basically, keep punching the time clock, and putting all these things that I need to do to be successful together, instead of, it's so much easier just to take a nap right where I'm at and hope that there's an elk that appears, in this basin that I've been hunting for a day.
Yeah, and I don't know how many times this has happened to you, but I know we've been working areas, and you're working the high ridges early in the morning, and you can't locate a bull, and maybe they're just not responding. But you get that midday time frame, and you start working down in those basins, or working the mid mountain to where you're working benches and things, and you'd be surprised how many times you bump into a bull, just stopping every 100 200 yards and doing some cow calling and stuff, or some bugling, and that bull may not respond from up high, especially if he's been called to a lot, or pressure's high, or different things. But you drop down in that timber patch with him, and it's kind of a different ball game, and just being able to keep pushing along and just keep going and keep at it, that's I think a big mistake a lot of people make.
And just just doing what it takes, always doing something that's going to be productive and advantageous, for you as a hunter is kind of, it comes down to mental and physical exertion. Do you have what it takes upstairs to keep pushing on and always, chasing opportunity? And can your body essentially hold up to that, day after day after day? This year, not to throw Charlie under the bus, but his wife had killed a great bull this year on a special tag in Washington. We came home, rested up for a day, went back to Idaho. I killed a bull the first day there, packed it out, went back up in the mountains, and then I called a great bull in for Charlie, and his arrow drifted a little bit and caught it up front. And we spent the rest of that morning tracking and basically called it off. We had lost blood, lost tracks, and at that point, we're beat down, we're sore. We've packed 2 bulls in less than 4 days. Now all of a sudden your mental game is in the toilet because you just lost a great bull. And it was hot, and at that point, it's easy to quit. And we decided, we drove around for a little bit, and you start to kind of fall into that trap. And sure enough, successful people were like, "Hey, we drove all the way to Idaho. We need to get back out and go back into the area." We went in there that night, still tired, still hurting, and we're able to call his bull in, that same night. And it was that thing, like, we easily could have took that night off, and just chalked it up to being sore and tired and mentally out of it. But being willing to climb back up that mountain and get into that area paid off.
One of the things I tell myself is that, I may be sore, maybe tired, and this sucks. I'm absolutely miserable. But, October comes, and we don't have elk season for 11 months. And, like, one day after elk season, I'm going to miss this like crazy. So I might as well just stick it out.
Yeah, kind of leave it all on the table.
Yeah, leave it all on the field, like they say.
Yep.
All right, so number 5 is overthinking calling. I know a lot of guys, they kind of over strategize and overthink what they're doing or what's going on, what the elk's thinking. Tell me about overthinking calling.
There's a lot of guys that are unsuccessful. I think they're looking for something to hang, not necessarily an excuse, but they're looking for something to blame or something to feed off of. And a lot of times it gets put back to, not saying the right things to the elk and kind of this whole overthinking your calling or elk language. I call completely on emotion. During the rut, bulls are worried about two things besides staying alive. They're worried about making love and fighting off bulls that are going to get in their way of making love. So essentially, it all comes back to without getting too graphic. That bull's got, just like us. We've only got 1 month to hunt them. They've only got 1 month to do their thing. So they're pretty fired. They're pretty fired up and protective over what they've got going on, which kind of elicits that fighting side of them as well. So I'm always trying to feed off that emotion, trying to think of, how nature typically works, if we weren't involved. Like if there were just, bulls and cows out in the woods, how would this work? Bull advertises himself. We all know that that's way louder than a cow call. It's basically advertising to these cows, and the cows come to him. That's, I think it's pretty well known that that's how that works. As far as, an elk making a specific sound or an elk trying, to say a specific thing, I have a hard time believing it. Back when I was in high school and college and kind of first learning this elk calling game, I'm not going to lie, I spent, 5-6 days a week out in the field during September and into early October, and I brought a little Right in the Rain journal and basically just evaluated elk, from ridge tops and afar and across clear cuts, and just, tried to pay attention to noises they were making, what the herd dynamics were like, if satellite bulls were around, anything that I could, I ended up with a 4-inch ring, 3-ring binder full of notes. And there's no rhyme or reason to the type of bugle, whether that bull, is lip balling or what we call a challenge bugle, whether he's got a clean 2-note high bugle. There's no rhyme or reason to what he was saying. And so that's kind of what led me to believe, like, I'm just playing on getting that bull either fired up to come fight me, or I'm getting that bull so fired up that he's got a hot cow that he's willing to leave the cows that he's already got, or if it's a satellite bull I'm calling to, that I'm a hot cow that I'm willing to, basically screw up and come into a call.
So on overthinking calling, do you think that being able to call well or not being able to call well plays into that? I know a lot of guys, man, I can't call very well, or I can't use a reed, so they just stick with certain calls, and then they kind of overthink what they're doing with that. How does capability as far as calling play into overthinking calling?
All right, this is going to be a complete walk in a circle answer. I think being a good caller definitely has its advantages and can only help you. Especially one of my strategies is mimicry. A lot of times if I get in with a bull and try to elicit this fighting side of him, I don't know if you've ever been mimicked, as an adult, just over and over. I've got a 5-year-old kid, and he goes through these little stages where it's like, I love my kid to death, but after about 3 minutes of him mocking me, I get all fired up, and it's like time to tell him to knock it off.
Challenge bugle.
Yeah. So by being able to be a real good caller, I feel that I can mimic any elk sound out in the woods. Regardless of lip ball, I'm going to lip ball. If he's doing a high clean 2-note, I can do it. But on the same token, I don't think you need to be a good caller at all to be able to kill elk. I think you need to be able to make 3 somewhat simple calls. You need to be able to find an elk, whether that's by location bugle or cow call, or letting them even do it on their own. And you just need to be able to get in and get the right cadence and essentially let them know that there's a bull. And we've talked about this quite a bit before. Like, some real elk are horrible. So that gives me no reason to believe that you can't fool a bull with an absolutely horrible bugle. I want everybody to think you need to be the best caller in the world so that you keep buying calls and keep that, that never-ending search on. But, 100% truth, I don't think you need to be the best caller. Now, I will, what I already touched on, being a good caller can work to your advantage.
But timing is probably the more important.
Yeah, timing, cadence, and essentially kind of, making the right call at the right time, and basically, whether you're going to fire him up and we talked about this, the knack. I've always wanted to write an article about the knack, but you can't touch it. I mean, you can't write about it. You can't explain it. It's just knowing what call to make at the right time while you're calling them in. Do I go to two estrus wines and then all of a sudden I hit him with the challenge bugle? That's some of that stuff that, we can sit and do all these podcasts all we want, but you're never really going to be able to explain why you're doing exactly what you're doing.
And that comes from just being able to do it, being out there. But at the same time, I don't think I could explain why I did something in a certain situation. It just felt right.
Yeah, and I'm fortunate to hunt with a lot of my good friends that are really good elk hunters, and a lot of times we're on the same page. It's weird, like, well, why did we say that we should hit him with a challenge bugle, or why did he throw me a stick at the same time that I was thinking I should start raking a tree, and some of this stuff. So a lot of times we're on the same page, and I think it comes down to whether it's patience or impatience, and trying to make something happen, and running off the information you're given, and to touch on. People always ask me, like, do you ever think of what you're saying to the elk? And I can say almost 99% of the time, I very rarely put any thought into what this is supposed to communicate to the elk. If that makes any sense. I've said I'm trying to, elicit that fighter lovemaking side of that bull and try to get him fired up. But I very rarely, like, well, I wonder what this elk thinks I'm going to say. If I do that,
I think you're right in that you're broadcasting emotion, and I think the animals work off more of emotion than language per se. You can't think of it like what are the exact words that we're using to each other, but it's what emotion are we playing off, which just boils down to more of like a social behavior between elk versus a language behavior.
Yeah, and I've countless times kind of got on a lackadaisical bull, one that just seemed to be real lazy, but he was beagling enough. And I mean, just by getting in there and playing on that emotion, you can feel within that calling or that setup that bull get fired up within 10 or 15 minutes. You've essentially taken him from a lazy, I'll bugle and answer you phase to I'm about ready to rip your head off phase. And so that's kind of led me to believe after countless times of essentially turning up the heat on a bull that that you're playing with their emotions and really feed off of that.
Well, that kind of leads right into the next big mistake, and not necessarily in order, but calling too quiet or calling too small. I know that can be huge, especially working into a bull, and that kind of goes into what we were talking about, being able to mimic and being able to sound equal or the equivalent size bull, because a lot of times if you're sounding too small, that bull is just not going to care. You're not a threat to him.
Yep. We always have to kind of laugh, and I never poke fun or make fun of anybody, but a lot of times, I'll have guys ask for, I want what reed makes the best satellite bull or spike squeal, and without, there's many ways to kill bulls, and if you're successful, making spike squeals or small bull calls, then that's great. But I think all of our goal going into season is to kill, a big herd bull. A lot of guys, whether you lie to me or not, anybody, it's like, if there's a herd bull and a satellite bull there, which one are you going to shoot? And I think very rarely are somebody going to say, I'm going to shoot the satellite bull because I think the meat's going to be more tender.
They're lying to you and themselves.
Yeah, so there are guys, me included, that's going to shoot the very first satellite bull that comes in. But if those two bulls are standing side by side, I'm shooting the herd bull every time. And I always want to give myself a chance at killing that herd bull if there's an opportunity. And you touched on it already. In my opinion, you are not a threat to that bull if you sound too small and are too quiet. That bull is already, that's his everyday, routine in September, is to chase these pesky little satellite bulls off all day long anyways. He's not going to react to it. He's basically going to let you come show yourself and, run you off just like, all of the other the real satellite bulls that are, pestering them all day trying to break a cow or two off.
And if anyone's ever watched elk behavior, watched a herd bull work, it is amazing how much time they spend chasing those bulls, especially if they got two or three of them. And, they may be screaming their head off and just going nuts, but he's not going to go very far because he's got to chase off spikes in every direction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, why is he going to go necessarily, say you're set up 150 yards, why is he going to go 150 yards away when he most likely has a satellite bull, right on a cow, so it's like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So the quiet, too small, I call as big as I can, as loud as I can all the time. It's worked on satellite bulls, and I think then you're kind of, igniting their curiosity. You're kind of putting a little spark, what's going on, and now you've kind of flipped it. You're trying to call the satellite bull and that thinks you probably got cows if you're bugling like a herd bull. So now you've kind of flipped the table. Like, well, there's still a reason for that satellite bull to come in, because if you're cow calling and herd bull bugling or challenge bugling, he may be coming in to try to break a cow off. So you're kind of, flipping that, and we've had great success killing, at least where I live, what maybe our herd bulls are like satellite bulls to everybody. We've had great success knocking off, these 3.5 and 4.5-year-old bulls, bugling like the biggest bull in the woods. And the too quiet part, I don't know how many people, without calling the guys that call too quiet or too small unsuccessful elk hunters, I always want to ask, like, have you ever got a herd bull or a giant herd bull at 40 yards or 50 yards in the timber and had one, rip a bugle off at you? There is no way that I'm a big guy. I've got a big set of lungs. I've heard a lot of people call, and I would say I'm probably on the upper level of volume.
Yeah, I would say so.
I cannot even come close to replicating the volume, the intensity, the real life, bass, whatever word you want to, call it. There's a realism to it, and I can't replicate the volume.
No,
and they'll literally blow your head off at 40 or 50 yards.
Yeah, and you can feel it in your chest, and there's no way that you can replicate that, like you said.
Yeah. I mean, you've got a real deep, knocking grunt, a thumpy grunt, and you can feel that when you're in a room. But you get out in the timber and basically, have limitless, amount of area for that to travel to. You really knock the upper end of that off, and so I videotape myself. I've walked 100 yards away and bugled back at the camera with my volume at the same setting that I had it on. And you go back and listen to it, you're like, man, I can barely pick that up.
Yeah.
And so that's why, the volume wise, I'm a big advocate of just, hammer the bugle, because really you're going to sound like, you may sound like a big bull, but you're not going to have a ton of volume when you get to wherever you're trying to reach.
And see, to me, that it says timid. It says that bull's timid if he's not that loud. Actually, I had a scenario. That big Rosie I shot. I was just mimicking him. He didn't have a very large bugle, so I didn't know how big he was. I mean, per se, but just basically mimicking him on size wise and moving down a bench, and he's screaming, but he's not coming closer. So I'm just moving closer, and he comes around the corner, and I see he was a good bull, and he screams at me, and I just cut him off right away, scream back at him. And he just turns and walks away, like didn't care at all. And so I stepped it up a little bit bigger, and he comes around the corner again, and he kind of screams at me, and then he just leaves again. I was like, what the heck? And so I just started getting bigger and bigger. I mean, I was as big as I could possibly go before he finally came back over and started raking a tree at 40 yards. But he did not care whatsoever when, I was this exact same bugle as he was.
Yep. Yeah, and, it's one of those things where I think, call as big as you can, call as loud as you can, and you're going to get more results. The trees, whether you're hunting in timber, it's going to drown the sound out. I want to be able to reach 800 yards down in that canyon, not 400. I want to be able to, and so that's kind of my goal, is to have the chance to at least hear or have the opportunity to make a play on a bull by, bugling as loud as I can. Not only for opportunity, but also I think for success. It's kind of a two-way street there, that you get, killing two birds with one stone, as far as, opportunity and, as far as tactics go. You're kind of working to the senses of the bull and kind of how the, how nature works that way.
And, to touch on something else, I think that if you're looking for a small bull, you're looking for any, you're just filling tags, you want to kill the first thing. I've always said that I think I run into more small bulls than any of my friends that are hunting, for any elk, and I only chase big bulls. It just so happens that those smaller bulls are following big elk. And you run into it all the time. I mean, how many times you've been chasing a big bull and a satellite slips right in the way? Yeah.
I mean, that's just like we thought. That's herd dynamics. I mean, in Eastern Washington, you can only hunt spikes. Well, a lot of guys go out and try to, cold call or call really small, or, call like a cow. Is like, no, the spikes are with the cows typically, and the cows are with the big bulls. You want to just go chase those giant bugles and try to slip in on a spike.
Yep.
It's like, trying to figure it out. Or, your satellite bulls, they're not necessarily, they're trying to get a piece of the pie, or break a cow off. And, so the only way to do that is essentially hang around with that herd bull's herd that has all the cows.
So number 7 is physical fitness, and I know this is a big topic throughout the industry, and it's one of those things that we all should do, but maybe we don't do to the full extent that we need to. Is physical fitness or lack thereof?
Yeah, and I'm definitely not a prime example of being the best in shape. I've always get myself into good enough shape to hunt any of the country that I want to be in, and do it for 14 days on end. And also be able to do it with packing bulls out and not letting my buddies or myself down, from that point on. It's huge. And I always explain to guys, like, you have, a section of land, say 100 square miles. If you're not in good enough shape, you've essentially cut off half of the land available to you to hunt, or a quarter of the land available to you to hunt, because you're not good enough shape to get to it, whether that's 2 miles off the road, but it's up a steep ridge line, or, if it's 2,000 feet below the truck, that area is all now off limits to you, and you've essentially got to get it done in a lot smaller section of area. And that's, I know a lot of people around here that, road hunt or, do small little hunts away from the road, and it's like you're really cutting down the amount of elk you have to hunt. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of, 1 or 2 day spikes, come back to the truck. And even on 1 or 2 day spikes, you're usually climbing in, 4 or 5 miles, usually up or down 1 or 2,000 feet, and you've got to, do it reverse on the way out, not to mention all the up and down throughout the day. I don't want to come to day 3 or 4 and be so sore that I need to take a day off.
Yeah.
Or one of my hunting partners kills a bull on day 2, and now all of a sudden I've got to spend 2 days licking my wounds to be able to go back out on day 5.
Yeah. And I think that carries a lot of weight with, how long you can go. And
yep.
The better your physical fitness, the quicker you're going to recover. And like you said, day 8 gets really hard when you're out of shape. And but if you're in shape, hopefully day 8 is, just another day.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed it before. You come in to hunting season out of shape, day 8 you're still recovering. If you come in shape, I'm not going to lie, you're still probably going to be awful, sore and tired by day 3 or 4. But at that point, you're starting to recover and getting back, getting stronger towards the end of the season.
And recovering faster as well.
Yep. I mean, so that's kind of, physical fitness. A lot of guys go into it, especially, the blues, for instance, they draw a special tag and they don't realize that all the roads are in the top and they've got to drop 3,000 feet into all these bottoms to hunt elk. It's just showing up and not having the ability to hunt where the elk are. You also have got the, physical fitness. I mean, you've got to be able to pack that elk out. Yeah, getting there, maybe hunting downhill is one thing, but by being able to put that bull, you owe it to the elk to get it back out, take care of all the meat and get it back out in a timely fashion as well.
One of the points I'll make on it is that when you look at it in basic numbers, the difference between if I'm able to hike a 12-minute mile versus me hiking a 20-minute mile or a 30-minute mile, I'm covering twice as much ground.
Yep.
And being able to cover that ground without taking breaks, and oh man, I'm tired.
Yep.
I need water break.
Yep. And what my last point on physical fitness is tying it back to mental, your mental state. Is if the faster your body wears down, the quicker you're going to start doubting yourself and being willing to pull the plug. I mean, so I almost treat physical fitness as like, kind of armoring my mental state of mind and kind of, armoring that up, because as soon as I'm sore, that's when the doubt starts creeping in and you're not willing to go over the extra knob, or you're willing to talk yourself into driving, or you're willing to talk yourself into, only getting half a mile away from the truck.
Oh, absolutely. That mental toughness is directly tied to physical fitness.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So number 8, some of the biggest problems that elk hunters have is playing the wind, or maybe playing the wind, or trying to play the wind too well.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of going to be a goofy topic, but there's guys that completely play the wind wrong. Which is never going to work. You can fool their ears, you can fool their eyes, but you're never going to fool their nose. You've got to get the wind somewhat right. Now taking that and using it to your advantage, I'm going to kind of explain the way I do it, and I think, and I'm going to explain why I think this is one of the mistakes, is that say the guys did everything right and he's played the wind perfect. He's got the wind perfect. He's got the perfect setup, but he's got the wind, pinpointed on his nose. He has no clue if that bull's going to go left or right. And a lot of times that bull's going to walk straight at him until he's to a point where he's going to hold up or freeze. There's some guys that aren't going to take a frontal shot. There's also some guys that, they're going to hold up too soon. What I've always, by being able to play the wind and use it as a tool to help you be more successful, we call it, the half moon. A bull's always going to try to check the wind on you, almost always. There are some exceptions to the rule, but if I'm set up with, say, the wind slightly hitting, my left cheek, I'm pretty sure that bull's going to try to, circle me to the right. And so by that, I'm able to set up it the right way. I'm able to, kind of situate myself the right way, get the right shooting lanes, and essentially move into that bull. A lot of times we'll call and actually move into that half moon, knowing that if we call again, he's going to, even try to catch wind further on that location.
Yeah. And that just boils back down to knowing elk and elk behavior, and knowing that elk's, especially if he's been hunted before, he's going to try to check wind on you.
Yep. And also, the other thing that's in the back of your mind is guys not paying enough attention to the thermals, what time of day it is, because I think Mother Nature and the elk were in it together when they planned like the prime time when you're finally in on a bull and getting ready to call him in, and when the thermals are going to switch.
Yeah,
there's some coordination, because it seems like every time you've worked the morning, thermals are going down, you're just getting in, you did all your work, you've gotten set up or whatever, and it's like, oh no, the wind's hitting me in the back of the neck, it's hitting me in the side of the face, and so by being able to recognize that and being a smart enough elk hunter, maybe hunting the area and knowing what time the sun's going to hit that basin or whatnot, I'm making some decisions, like I might just set up on contour and try to give me the best, kind of the biggest envelope for air, as far as those thermals switching and playing that right.
Yeah, and I think another mistake guys make is, okay, I located this bull, I'm standing up on a ridge, and the wind is doing this. I'm going to bomb down in this hole, which now the wind's going to change because I'm in a canyon.
Yep.
Not to mention thermals. It's going to bounce off this wall if it's coming at me, or the angles that it's coming out. So understanding kind of the lay of the land and what that wind's going to be doing, where the elk is, on top of thermals. Yeah,
exactly. And knowing all those transitions, like how far down this how far down the side slope can I go before the main canyon creek or the main draw is going to start pulling down, and then I'm going to get a swirl, and then I'm going to get down finger, down ridge. There's some weird combinations of wind, and if somebody watched me elk hunt, they think I was crazy. I've got my stinking wind checker out more than I'm going through 1 or 2 bottles of wind checker in a 2-week hunt. It's, I can feel it on my face, but it's like, I want to be able to watch that wind and see if I'm in a swirling area, kind of, what's my conservative play here without blowing these elk out.
So when you're moving down an elk and you're checking that wind, and all of a sudden you got a bad wind, are you just holding up? Are you pulling back? What's your strategy, or how long do you let that bad wind move around on you?
It depends on how much room I have to fix the issue. If I'm all the way in the bottom and I know I can't getting it, if I can't fix the issue, I may pull out, or just back out. If I've got enough room or enough slope to fix it, and it kind of goes back to doing whatever it takes, I might bomb, I might drop 500 feet just so I can get a half circle on them and get the wind back right. So at least there's a chance. Mm-hmm. Because if I can, a lot of guys I've seen push right into, those situations, trying to force it, thinking they may get lucky, and very rarely are you ever going to, pull through that and be successful.
No, I think there's a law written somewhere that says when in doubt, the wind will be wrong, that it's going to go out your back.
Yeah, I mean, Kelly's hunting the Toucan last year is a prime example. We had finger ridges that would pull the wind down a little bit, or at least make it swirl. The main drainage was pulling it down, yet it was 90 degrees, and on the open slopes it was going up. And so you almost had to be Einstein trying to figure out what the heck the wind was going to do as you were getting into if you were in the crotch of, a finger draw going into the main draw, you're like, what the heck, is going to be going on? So you're trying to, you had wind coming at you at 3 different directions in one spot. So, I mean, you're trying to make, I mean, there is some educated decisions that got to go into some of your moves, just so, or you can look forward to, 100 yards and know that there's an elk across the little draw below you. Well, you can't go right at them, even though where you're at, the wind's blowing up. By the time you get to that creek, it's going to be going down. So you actually have to drop below them and kind of play that wind for that short stretch.
So for overall wind direction and those situations, what's your advice and what's a good takeaway? What do we have to take away from this?
I would say if you were to sum all that up and give an overview, just pay attention to your wind. Have the understanding that the wind, could potentially be different between where you're at right now and where the elk's at, or somewhere in between, and try to make educated decisions, on that move. And I typically split the wind, if that makes any sense. I try to play it right down the middle. If I think the wind's going down right now, it's going up, I'll try to maybe walk right at the elk so that it gives me the most, the best chance at calling them in.
All right, good advice. Good advice. All right, so number 9, we're looking at shooting and kind of boiling down the shot, or I guess the final shot. It's kind of a lot of guys muff it. There's a lot of adrenaline and emotion and buck fever and everything that goes into the shot. What do you think the biggest problem is there?
There's very few guys, and me included, that can have ice flowing through their veins at that time when you have a raging bull staring you in the eyes. Shooting out in my yard is completely different, and there's no way to replicate. I don't care how many 3D shoots I go to. I don't care how many times I pull the trigger on my 5-dot here in the yard. There's no way to replicate what's going on. My hands are sweaty. I've got most of the time I've got sweat dripping in my eyes, down my face. I've got, potentially mosquitoes trying to bite me, landing on me, whatever can go wrong. You've got an elevated heart rate, which you can't really account for or get yourself scared during your practice sessions. So all this kind of comes into play. And even last year, after killing a lot of bulls, when that bull came in at 6 yards, somewhere around 8 or 9 yards, I finally remembered that I should probably anchor and I should probably center my pin guard in my peep. It's trying to talk yourself, whether you got to write a note somewhere on your arrow shelf, whether, and I told you before, I think I've shot my last 3 or 4 bulls, and besides kind of knowing a yardage, I don't remember necessarily anchoring or centering peeps, centering pin guards, making sure my bubble was level.
Yeah, I know. I never remember any of that stuff, but I think Dan Evans, I got it from Dan Evans. He has on his limb, it's written, and it's anchor level squeeze, I think is what it says. And I remember I do that a lot, and I'll go through that sequence every time when I'm practicing, on top of being able to practice in awkward positions, or on your knees, or I don't know how many times you had to shoot around something or over something, and it just a funny position. I think that's really important. A lot of guys get worked up around, hey, I'm going to practice at 150 yards because then when I shoot 30, I'll be fine. Yep. But in all reality, you're going to have a lot of shots under that 50-yard mark, and they're probably not going to be you standing in your yard with your foot against the stick. Yeah,
you're going to have your right foot, on a 45% slope up above your bottom foot, and you're trying to dry your bow. And I'm pretty fortunate that my yard is completely unlevel, so I get I'm constantly working on a bubble level that never wants to sit still. And that's just part of it. And I don't, I brought this up just because you hear a lot of guys that are unsuccessful because they missed a shot or a bad shot, or basically a non-lethal shot. And I don't know really how you address it besides shoot a whole bunch. Go on a 3D shoot and put some pressure on yourself. Be able to shoot while you've got $1 or $2 on a target. Whether that gets you excited or not, it doesn't for most guys. But by putting a little bit of pressure on yourself, you kind of you get there. And I think just calming yourself down and walking yourself through it. Like you said, the whole anchor, aim, squeeze thing. Having some sort of a reminder of what to do is a huge help, even for guys that have did it a ton.
Yeah. Yep. There's just not a whole lot you can replace with that adrenaline rush.
Yep. Yeah. Just tons of shots, so that hopefully it's instinctive enough you can kind of push through that without too much error.
Yeah. One of the mistakes I made last year, and I usually shoot a lot of 3D courses and shoot the 3D course a lot. Last year was more, I just didn't have the time to get up there, so it was more just shooting at my shop every day. Well, I built a reputation of shooting at 50 yards all the time. we get to Idaho last year and moving in on an elk and still hadn't, made a peep yet, and just slipped into the timber, and this bull came running basically around the corner in a very, very tight spot. And I don't even fully remember knocking an arrow, but I had, literally seconds, if not less than, to make all of the decisions to go through.
Yep.
And I don't remember knocking there. I don't remember coming to full draw anchor, but I remember thinking anchor level squeeze. However, I did not even think about yardage, and I know it's because I shot 50 all summer, and I shot for 50, and that bull was 30, and it was like one of those things that instantly I knew what I did, but I just did not have the time. And it's one of those things you space, and I'd love to have that shot back.
I guessed that right. I was assuming you just automatically went to 50, and
and I have no idea why. It's if you asked me how far that bull was, I could have told you exactly how far it was. And it's not that I chose that he was 50. It's like I just, I built in that repetition in my head of shooting 50 all summer long. That's instantly where my pen went. Yeah. So you can build muscle memory, but don't build too much muscle memory, I guess.
Yeah. Don't be too instinctive.
All right, so the last one that guys make a lot of mistakes on is time, and I know this is a big one. So, what's your thoughts on the time issue?
People only got so much time, whether it's work, whether it's family vacation, whatever they choose to spend their time on. But there is no replacement for notching tags as time. You can be the best elk hunter in the world, but it takes time. I mean, you can go through 1 or 2, 3 days and not necessarily even get necessarily a call in, and it may be day 4. Well, if I'm the guy that's only taken a 3-day, extended weekend, those opportunities that come on day 4 through 10 are going to be non-existent. You talked about Dan Evans a little bit. I know, he's hunting a different class of bulls, but you watch him and follow him on some of his hunts. He's 14, 21 days in on, a particular animal with never even drawn his bow back. Mm-hmm. A lot of us that, are fairly successful elk hunters, still need time. I mean, we can be the best elk callers, the best elk hunters, make all the right decisions all the time. And there's no guarantee that you're going to, be able to call that bull in and have the opportunity. And I always say that the only thing in elk hunting that's for certain is that nothing's for certain.
Well, yeah, that's true.
I mean, there is one thing that works the last 10 times might not work the 11th time. And, something that's worked for you the last, 3 or 4 years on certain type of setups may fail you 10 times in a row. And, so by putting in the time, whether it's learning a bull, learning his patterns, finding an elk that's ready to play the game, that's more callable, all of these things take time, and there is no replacement for it. And, it's not so much a failure. Are these 10 things we talked about, potentially some of them can be fixed. Time's really one of those things where, if you truly want to notch a tag, I would highly suggest putting in as much time as possible.
Yeah, and you see a lot of that, and I think that's the one consistency you'll see throughout successful hunters is that they're putting in serious time in the field, and that's during season.
Yep, there's just no replacement. I mean, all of these other things we talked about can't happen if you don't have time in the field. You don't get a chance to shoot. You don't get a chance to overthink your calling, or simplify your calling. You don't get a chance to find elk. All of this stuff is basically whittled down, and that whole knack and experience you get from being out there is whittled down, which is kind of compounding. You spend 3 days a year, or maybe say you put on another weekend. You're spending 5 or 6 days a year. Well, you're not only limiting your chances for that year, but I'm putting 2 weeks or 21 days together of knowledge on top of having the ability to kill an elk. So not only am I gaining that extra knowledge, I've got the opportunity to kill an elk.
Yeah. So I got a question for you, Jason. When it comes to scouting versus time in the field, and this has kind of come up with this mule deer hunt that I'm working on because it's about 12 hours away from where I live. Would you take the time scouting, or would you rather have more time during season?
Definitely hunting. Yeah, scouting is huge, and I recommend it for for as far as elk hunting. scout as much as you can. Find rubs, find stuff from last year, find the elk, find the cows. If you're in a new area, you probably need to scout. But if I only had 2 weeks of vacation to use for hunting, I'm using 0 days of vacation for scouting, and I'm going to essentially, scout/hunt, for those 2 weeks. At least you have an opportunity. When you're scouting, you have zero chance of killing anything. I know you can, make the counter argument, well, at least you're getting yourself into a position. But what I found is that when opening day comes and hunting season rolls around, the pressure changes compared to where things were when you were scouting. Everything's a little bit different. So I'd rather go on, the most up-to-date information, which is, during hunting season.
No, absolutely. And I know that boils down a lot to, where we hunt, a lot of public ground, a lot of pressure, and, those elk can completely change opening day of season or thereabouts. So completely agree with you there on, I would take days hunting versus days scouting. But
I mean, scouting definitely can help you, get you in an area that's elky, has elk, holds elk. But ultimately, and as stupid and cliche as it sounds, the elk are where the elk are at when they die. Every bull that I've killed is right where he was at when I shot him. It sounds stupid, but that's, I can scout all year long. Not that I know we're running out of time here, but in 2008, I had located a giant bull, watched him all summer, every other weekend, every summer. And I hunted him like he was right where he was at, and come to find out we never did find him. And it's like, well, he was there every day. Well, pressure, some guys had put in a llama camp over on the ridge closer to where he was at from the side we were viewing him from, and it just changed the dynamics of that herd and that bull completely.
Yeah, and I think that varies depending on where you're at. I mean, like you said, down south, I think there's bulls are more consistent, that or maybe don't move quite as far.
Yep.
Or you're going to be able to see them a little bit more and things like that. But, definitely up north, it's tough to find those bulls that you see in July.
Yeah, they move, and ultimately they're eventually going to go find cows. So I've got trail cam pictures of them at this wallow or this watering spot. Ultimately he's going to move a little bit unless that's where his cows are at already.
Alrighty, Jason, appreciate it. Now I guess we have zero excuses on why we can't kill an elk this year.
I already put that disclaimer in there that the only thing that's for certain is that nothing is for certain. So that gives me a way out of anything that I've talked about today.
I was gonna say, if I don't kill one, I'm coming back and be like, nope, you were wrong.
No, I there's a ton of ways to get it done. There's successful hunters that do it completely different. It's just this way's worked. It's an exciting way to hunt, and we've had great success with it.
Alrighty, appreciate it, Jason, and hope to have you on again, and maybe we can cover some more topics. I know everyone was kind of excited to hear from you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Cody, and any time. And there's not too many things to get me jacked up like talking elk hunting.
Yeah, right? I mean, we could just do this podcast every week. I don't mind talking about elk hunting.
Yeah, I mean, we can go on forever.
Alrighty, Jason, appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Yeah, have a good one.
Hey guys, thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show and maybe even picked up a few tips along the way. Join us right here every Thursday morning for more interviews and great hunting tips. And be sure to help us out by leaving a review on iTunes. For more information about this show and the rest of our guests, check out the show notes for links and additional resources on our website, www.therichoutdoors.net.